But that's one thing they never asked me.
Is how the authors influenced you? The books that you read?
The author himself, by what he wrote, his whole style and manner of life.
Yeah.
Like my hero is Blaise Cendrars, do you see?
Yeah.
He's my hero in every respect. As a man, as a personality, as a writer, the style of writing, everything that he did in his life, to me, is marvelous, extraordinary.
Right. See, we have a start. Let's go.
Are we on? Are we on the air? And I say, Madame, I know that I am going to be short of money in about a week. Would you give me credit for a little while if I am broke? And she looks me up and down, like to say, she's taking my measurements, And suddenly she says, Mais oui, monsieur, certainement. Like that, certainly. For as long as you want. And I took advantage of it. I ate there on her credit, and I got the money to pay her back, which was unusual for me, because usually I fuck people up. I never did pay, don't you know? Thank you. Does nothing go with this, by the way? No vegetable, huh? No. Is that it, Bill?
Yeah, just what you have here.
There wasn't any veg. What, this here? You mean cucumber? Or what's that? That's the ratatouille. Mm-hmm. That's cold. Mm.
I don't understand. How do you eat this? First you cut it and then eat the meat and then go inside the bone with the little spoon?
I don't know where the bone is. I haven't found out yet.
No, here's a
Oh, God. But
oh, he didn't give you the ossobuco. Mm.
Yes, he did.
When do they give the Nobel Prize? Is there a certain time of the year that they give the Nobel Prize?
Yeah.
They do what?
A certain time of the year that they give the Nobel Prize.
Yes, in November.
In November?
Mm. It'll be this November or never.
Have you ever wanted it before? Have you ever?
Have I ever wanted it before?
Yeah.
No. I never thought about it.
Except for now? You mean this is the first time you ever thought about it?
It all began with the fact that my accountant was here one day and telling me that when I die, what's going to happen? And it is an atrocity what's going to happen. Everything that I own is going to be marked up very high. There won't be any inheritance money for the children. And this house would have to be sold to pay the inheritance tax. Mm. And I said, that's terrible. So what started me telling you about this now? Oh, about the Nobel Prize. So then it occurred to me, shit, I'm going to try for the Nobel Prize, and then I can pay off everything, don't you know? But I begin to even wonder if that's enough,
You mean if that money is enough?
If that money, it's $160,000 tax-free, which is lucky, tax-free.
It's a lot of money.
But I may owe them $400,000 or $500,000. But now I have learned. Hey, this chicken is not so tender, by the way, not so hot. I'm sorry. Not your fault. But I thought the sauté would be very tender. Oh, yeah, this is rather tough.
So it's the money that you're concerned with. The money.
So then it became the money. I said, well, I'm going to try and get it by winning the Nobel Prize, yeah. Mm. And then what you have to do is you have to lobby for it. That means you have to get people to write a little word about you and send it to them. I had the address, and they warn you not to have the people speak too much about you, to make it concise. And I had to tell them that. Oh my God, this doesn't look like it at all. This is so pitiful. Oh my God.
Is it?
Well, there is the bone, but you see what I mean? This is no way to do it. This is French, God damn it. This is an Italian dish.
And they make
the
it...
the French don't know how to do it. No, that's too bad. Well, there should be a nice round big bone.
So you use the spoon
and then you
to get in
just
the
go
middle?
in the hole, don't you know?
But there's no hole.
No, I don't see it.
Well,
This is too bad. A big fiasco. How is the chicken?
The chicken looks good.
Well, let's try the chicken. I'm through with this, to tell you the truth.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not fussy, but it's a complete disappointment.
Well, have some more wine.
Yeah, right. You're damn right.
Tell me
I was just... what would you like?
taste. I was going to ask you about the taste of these wines.
The taste.
Yeah.
Well, of course, that's the great thing about the wine, is the French wine. The American wines, I want to tell you, they don't taste much different one from another.
The American.
Though they pretend to be, they're named after French wines, and they may even have grown from French roots. But something, I'm going to go into that. It's either the soil or the climate or one other thing, and that's what I suspect. I believe that it's the fault of the Americans themselves. The American worker doesn't give a shit about what he's working at. He has no interest in his work. Now, the Japanese worker often begs his employer, may he stay overtime. He wants to finish something. He wants to make it perfect.
Because of the art of it?
Because what he's doing, he loves. He wants to turn out something beautiful. You never hear that American saying, boss, do you mind if I stay a couple of hours late?
God, no.
Do you see what I mean?
Really?
So I think that has a lot to do also with the wine making. That they don't caress the grapes, you know. They don't...
They don't care. They just don't care.
They don't give a damn, no. The Americans, and look how they turn out automobiles, the Americans. Look how many cars, hundreds of thousands are returned for repairs, aren't they, every year? Think of that. No country in the world is like that. And no country is as well paid as these fucking American workers. These, I'm trying to search for the name for them. The guy who lies down on the job, don't you know, who doesn't do the job. We won't get into that. We'll have to look up the dictionary again. But he is really the American. Oh, you know one thing, salt and pepper. What about salt and pepper? Oh, there it is. You know what is missing in this meal? I forgot. It should have been cheese. After our meat, then we should have had some nice cheese. A good smelly cheese, a Roquefort or something like that. Do you want that?
No. No salt.
It's not good for one, huh? Well, I'm in my 88th year eating things and drinking that are not good for me, huh? Only I've learned a little moderation. I'll say that, don't you know? Nothing to excess. Now, Matthew always says that the Greeks have another word, and that is, or not the Greeks themselves, but their writer, their great Kazantzakis says, everything to the extreme. That's his motto, everything to the extreme. Let's drink to that, huh? And I say everything without being edited. The editing is my bête noire, you know. Well, come back to Bliss Sundrova. Why do I like a guy like that? Why is he my hero? He came from Switzerland, but he left at about the age of 15 after robbing the family of all the jewels that he could find and the silverware, put it all in a big sack and took it to the pawn shop and bought himself a ticket for the Trans-Siberian Railway to go to China, which he did. Mind you, that's how he had to get there. When he gets to China, he has no job and he speaks no Chinese, so he gets work as a stoker in the furnace in the hotel, don't you know, in a big hotel. And when he gets enough to get out of there, he goes to Russia. He goes first to Moscow and then to St. Petersburg. He picked up Russian quickly. I don't know, he never had any Russian blood in him. And I must tell you, first off, about his name, that name is not his real name. That's a pseudonym that he adopted. And it's a very interesting one. If you think, Blaise is close to Brez. You know, Brez, when the coals are, the ashes are hot, you know? Brez, that's... And then Sandra is close to Sandra, which is ashes. Do you see? So he lays hot ashes.
What was his real name, though?
His real name was an unthinkable name. It's something like sauerkraut. It's a horrible Germanic Swiss name. Well, anyhow, he soon finds himself in the library at St. Petersburg, and he's reading in Russian, and he's reading Dostoevsky, Gogol, Chekhov, all these men. And mind you, he speaks Russian, and he learns Polish. And he's traveling constantly. Goes to Vladivostok. He goes here, there, everywhere, don't you know, within the Russian Empire. And finally, he gets to Paris, don't you know? And there he's at home right away. And he's in Paris, lands there, when just about the time that Dadaism took hold. But I ought to get quickly to the day that Sandra visited me at the Villa Seurat, which was a great tribute to me. No French writer had ever come to see me. And I had just written The Tropic of Cancer, which he fell in love with. And he made only one criticism, or two. One was, I should not have mentioned my going to the exhibition of Matisse. He said that was too cultural a thing to introduce. Besides, he didn't think Matisse was so hot. And then he says, I noticed that you speak highly of Marcel Proust. That, he called him a tapette, meaning a homosexual. You know, that tapette. Oh. He says, how can you read that man? Don't you know? And of course, I was in love with Marcel Proust. You must remember, when you read him, I don't know if you read him at all, that when he talks about the woman that he's in love with, it's always Albertine is her name, but it's Albert, who was a waiter in a sort of a cheap dance hall up in Montmartre. I used to go to that dance hall. It had pillars all through the hall. You know, I had to dance around these pillars. And this guy was like the bouncer, Albertine, Albert, don't you know? And that's who Marcel was in love with. You know, in the book, only in the book. I mean, but in actuality, he was after the guy in the dance hall. That was his...
Marcel Marceau or Marcel Proust?
No, not Marcel. Marcel Proust. Excuse me, what am I talking about? I'm sorry. That's the wine already. I've only had a sip. Well, so one night, I think I may have told this story, but it'll bear talking about again. We come to the champagne. He came to our house. Fred was there at the time, Pelez. And you know, Pelez was the clown whom I write about. And he came unexpectedly. And we had about that much cognac in a bottle. That's all we had to offer. Drinks all around for the three of us. But we made that last just as I did with Reichel on Christmas morning one morning. I had less even then. And he told one story after the other, Sandra. And he drove an Alfa Romeo with one hand, the left hand, through the Amazon. And he was among the headhunters in the Amazon. And the only reason that he came out alive was he showed us later when we got to a restaurant. He took us to a restaurant in Montmartre. And when we walk in, I'm a little ahead of myself. I'm a little too hepped up. When we walk into the restaurant, it's one that he knows. He knows the proprietor well. They all know him. there's a bar, a little bar often in these modest restaurants, and it was crammed with whores before starting to work. It was like 7 in the evening, don't you know? And he salutes them all with his left hand, I forget, you know, hi, you know. And as soon as we sit down at the table, he calls over the chef, and he says, "Du champagne pour tout le monde." Champagne for everyone. And then when he uncorks it and they pour it, he raises his glass, he stands up, and he turns to the girls at the bar, and he says, "À nos vrais ambassadeurs," to our real ambassadors, the prostitute.
Oh.
How is that?
Yeah, I
Isn't
like
that
that.
beautiful?
Now, he drove a car through the Amazon?
He drove a car through the Amazon. Don't ask me how. Where were the roads? I don't know the Amazon.
Well, what was it about Sendrar's writing that was so influential for
listen,
you?
Last night there was a girl cooking here for me called Molly. Sandy had met her at a bar. And Sandy said she's a great fan of yours. She wants to cook for you. So when the girl sat down, we had the food. I said, "I understand you're a great reader of mine." I didn't have to say another word. It was like our hair stood on end, and she began talking. What it does to her. She says, "You know, I'd get caught in the throat. I'd burst out laughing. I'd fart. I'd do all sorts of things reading you. You made me do everything, don't you know?" And that's the way it was. With Sandra, it was electrifying. Electrifying. I used to put the book down, and I'd walk up and down the room with my hands like this. "Oh, my God, no, he did that? He did that? He wrote that?" Like that. You know, I can't believe it. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
How better can I describe it? It was all feeling, don't you know? At the same time, as every Frenchman will tell you, he possessed an enormous vocabulary, and not only in a literary one, but in all the, say, the language of criminals, the language of tradespeople, every vocabulary you want, he knew it. Do you see what I mean? And interspersed them. And when I first began to write, I used to have beside my desk on the wall a big sheet of paper with my favorite words. And my object was, as I type, I'd look up, I'd say, "Get that word in." Well, listen, I stopped you from eating them.
No, I'm finished. I don't understand how he lost his arm. How?
Oh, in the war.
Oh,
in the war.
Oh.
And listen, it was in the First World War, which was the bloodiest war. We had trench warfare. And he was in the trenches, and a shell splintered, you know, and cut her. It was dangling. His arm was dangling from the bone. And they put him in a, what do you go to the hospital in?
A gurney?
An ambulance.
Yeah. Oh,
They put him on the bottom with about 15 bodies piled on top of him to rush him to a place where there was a nunnery and there were nurses and surgeons. And he lay on the floor there, bleeding to death, don't you know? He tried to do it with rags. Everything got soaked through him. So finally he decided, if I don't get operated on soon, I'm going to die. He gets up. He has a pistol still in his holster. He takes out the pistol. He raps at the door. And there are two surgeons at work. And he says, "Look," he points it at him, "I'm next or I shoot you." And that's how he got operated on. Got the thing cut off.
Oh, no wonder.
Imagine what guts. And now, when I think of it, I saw him just before he died. I was told he was very, very ill, and he was there sitting in a chair, and suddenly I see the tears roll down his cheeks, the pain. He refused to take any painkillers. He wanted to know what the experience of dying was like. Can you imagine a man with that? And so he took nothing, and he couldn't stop it. The pain was so great, he began to cry. And when I saw that brave, courageous, heroic man with tears coming out, I ran out of the room. I didn't even say goodbye to him. I couldn't stand it. Would you believe that?
Oh.
That's how I left him. I never went back. He died shortly after. It was just too much for me to see this great man giving in, don't you know? But imagine, he says, I want to know what it's like dying. Shows you what an unusual type.
There were a lot of similarities to you and Sandra. Yeah.
In many ways, yeah.
For instance,
The only thing, he was more of a man than I am.
how can you say that?
Oh, I can say that. I could never have gone through that First World War. I could never have gone with my pistol and said, I'm next, you know, things like that. I could never have gone up the Amazon.
But you've done other things.
I've done other things, yes. That put us together. But mainly it was he liked the way I wrote and I liked the way he
He
wrote.
respected you.
Oh,
and you respected
yeah.
him.
Yeah, we were like brothers. Now let me tell you, Sandra treats me like a legionnaire, like a soldier that he had had in the army. We go to the bar and there's always whores lined up, you know, mixed with the clientele. And so he says, look at that one standing right there. He tells her, come over here, like that. Yeah, they're very crude, you know, with their women, with the whores. And then he says, look at, regardez les nichons, regardez-moi ça. They say, look at that for me, regarde-moi ça. That's how they say it, regarde-moi ça. That means literally, look me that. That's how it is, but it means look at that for me, will you? Take a look, take a good look at that. And with that, he puts his hand in and lifts it out, and he said, look, c'est beau, n'est-ce pas? He holds it there, c'est beau, huh?
Oh.
You see what I mean? You could do that in France. You know, nobody could think anything of it, especially in Montmartre along the boulevard. You might not on the Champs-Élysées, don't you? But he always acted like the legionnaire, if you know what I mean. And yet, that man was the tenderest man. Once there was a questionnaire sent out to all the important French writers, and there were many questions asked. And one of them was, what is the quality in woman that you think best, that you like best? And you know what Sandra put down? One word, innocence. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? This rough man, innocence. I thought it was marvelous. Marvelous. And that illustrates him again. This duality, don't you know? Tendresse, vulgarité, obscenité, all those things, don't you know?
Innocence.
At once, all in one man, don't you? It's a little bit like Henry Miller.
It's a lot like Henry Miller.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to ask you as well. Is Sandra was obviously a very direct influence on the way your style, let's say, or your writing.
He wasn't. No, he knows. That's the strange thing. He did not influence me. He had an influence on my psyche, but not in my writing. I didn't acquire anything through Sandra. No, I must tell you that.
And was that a gift to you, or did you acquire it from?
Listen, I have acquired everything from every place, everywhere, everybody. Do you understand? I can't single out single men. There were men like Knut Hamsun I started to talk about, who was my great hero, the Norwegian, who was a traitor to his country, you know, in the end. Well, I tried to write like Knut Hamsun. I would give my right arm to be able to write like Knut Hamsun, but I couldn't, don't you know? So I fell back on just being myself, and that's the best thing you can be, don't you know? If I were asked on the point of death, you know, by the angel of deliverance, what would you like to be now in the next life? I'd be at a loss to say who I'd like to be. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I must tell you, this reminds me of D.H. Lawrence. that D.H. Lawrence wrote one wonderful thing about the resurrection of Christ. He said, you know, that Christ, when he was resurrected, became an ordinary man. I don't know if you know that. Do you know that? He elected now, after having been the master and the savior of the world, now he wanted to be just a nobody. The French call it a quelconque. And quelconque. And that's what Christ wanted to be after he was resurrected. Where Lawrence gets this from, I don't know. But it's a brilliant idea. Because after you have tasted everything, you want to come back to nothing, don't you know? To the simplest. But I was going to talk tonight about the countries. There are varying tastes. Now, according to legend, the old Egyptians were beer drinkers, you see. There are other countries, nations, that were beer drinkers, like the Scandinavians. And more than beer drinkers, the hard liquor, like schnapps, like aquavit, you know, and things like that. Terrible things that knock you out. You see, the trouble with all the Scandinavians is they're a dull people. They're a boring people. Do you see what I mean? But the women hate the men, you know. The men are terrible. The men are mutes. Until they get a gallon of stuff down their throat. Do you see what I mean? Then they fall flat on their face. I got acquainted through correspondence with a Swede who was a translator from French into English and Swedish and Norwegian. Very fine translator. Translated Rimbaud, the Surrealists, the Symbolists, all the great French poets he translated, and very well. And I began a correspondence with this man. And then one day he says, I'm going to be in Paris on a certain date. Could I see you? I would like to have a talk with you. And I thought nothing better. But to make sure, instead of telling him to come to my house, I make a date at a cafe on the Boulevard Saint-Michel. I'll never forget. On the Boulevard Saint-Michel and a street, a broad street, whose name I forget, leading to the Pantheon. Now this is a very celebrated spot. I go to meet him there, and believe me, within 7 minutes of talking to him, I was so fed up with him, with his trivia, his nonsense, that I suddenly said, excuse me, I just thought of it. I have a rendezvous, I forgot, right up the street. And I forgot all about it. Will you excuse me? And I ran away from him. I just didn't walk. And at the corner where I'm supposed to have my rendezvous, I turn and I run and I begin zigzagging through the street in case he followed me. Do you understand? Now that man happened to be, later on, the head of the literary committee for the Nobel Prize. Think of that, huh? Yeah. And if he remembers that incident, don't you know, he must have held that in for me for years.
Oh.
What did they say? What have they told people who have asked the committee about Henry Miller?
I'll tell you what Durrell told me. He met one of the chief men. And Durrell says, how come Henry Miller has never received it? And the man hung his head sheepishly, and he said, Monsieur Durrell, I tell you, I think I must tell you that I believe we have been waiting for him to become respectable. Can you imagine that? And with that, you know, I hit the ceiling. I said, never in my life will I become respectable. I'll never be anything else. I don't think I can ever stop writing. Don't you know? I might write crap after a while, but I'll still be writing, I feel. I may die with a pen in my hand, though I'd rather die this way, with my arms folded and a seraphic smile. That's how I figure.